Welcome back. Well, we just heard an amazing story of survival from Eric Kane. He was wrongfully convicted of murder for 25 years in prison. And now we're joined by a jury consultant, Dave Zehner. Welcome to the set.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we have you here today because we want to kind of break down the thought behind the jury and kind of how this happened, how he was convicted for 25 years of, basically convicted for life, but then served 25 years and then was released. So is this a common case with a jury where someone gives a statement and there's no other evidence, but then they're convicted?
Yes, it's actually very common. Jurors are like everyone. When faced with a new situation, like a trial, they look for cognitive shortcuts, something they can do to simplify their decision-making process. And unfortunately, one of the simplest points that people can make a cognitive shortcut of is, did they give a confession? And if they gave a confession, well, I don't have to think about this anymore. It's very simple. It's an open and shut case, and that's unfortunately what the jurors did here, despite any other evidence they heard. Once they make that decision, then the brain shuts down and doesn't hear any of the counter evidence, and they move along and you agree with what the prosecution says in the case.
Wow, okay, so the one statement can kind of just seal the deal for a jury. Now, you work closely whenever it comes to juries. Tell us your background.
I've worked as a jury consultant for over 15 years, worked on over 500 cases and over 150 venues throughout the country, and I've worked on over 80 criminal cases, including over 10 death penalty cases. So I've had a lot of experience with trying to determine what goes into the decision-making process of jurors when they have to make decisions, especially about guilt or innocence. And these are very strongly held beliefs people have that come into play when they make decisions, especially in a death penalty case like we heard about.
So when you heard his story right there, you could kind of relate with the jury, right? Like why the decision was made.
Yeah, I mean, while it's a horrible thing that happened to Eric, I also feel sorry for the jury because they were given bad information. And the jury can only make as good a decision as the information they are given. And they were told that someone confessed to a crime. After
hearing Eric's story, do you hear those cases still today where people were maybe pushed into a statement?
It's very common. That's why finally we had some reforms and they videotape all conversations with defendants. And it's a big change because before, anything that happened before the statement was unknown.
Right.
And so when a defendant would come and claim that they were coerced, they had no proof. And hopefully with the new reforms that are in place, that will happen less. Unfortunately, there's no way to guarantee it'll never happen.
Right, exactly. So turning now to other things that we see in the news lately, other cases that we're seeing with juries. Tell us what your thoughts are. What was your thought on the Casey Anthony trial?
It was, I mean, the more and more information that's coming out about that case, it sounds like the jury, this is going to sound surprising, the jury got it right. With the information they were given, you would hope that a jury would keep the burden of proof on the prosecution. And the first three things a jury wants to know is how was the person killed, when did it happen, and why did it happen? And the prosecution in that case did not have any of those three nailed down. They admitted they didn't have the first two. And to sentence someone to death when you don't have the evidence or the proof, you would hope that juries wouldn't do that. You would wish the jury in this case, in Eric's case, would have been as probing in their thoughts.
Absolutely. And then another question, how does something become high profile? I mean, to me, Eric's case I would feel like would be just as high profile. Two people. Tell me, how does a case become where everyone knows about it? Everyone's watching the TVs to hear the verdict.
Yeah, there's usually some kind of media hook. In this case, it was what was different about the Casey Anthony case was that it ran so counter to expectations. Everyone who's a parent or anyone in general just thinks that a mother, as soon as their child disappears, would be running to the police, looking for some way. And for 30 days, she didn't even mention that her child was gone. And that ran so counter to expectations people have that they all wanted to know, how could this happen? And what people really wanted to know is, boy, how can they make sure this never happens again?
Absolutely.
And that's why people were so upset by the verdict, because they think that this would almost encourage this type of behavior.
But being a jury consultant / expert, you say that with everything that was presented, they made a good decision, or
with the information they were given, they made what we hope would be the correct decision. The prosecution needs to prove their cases. And if they don't prove their case, like in this case, the evidence just wasn't there to convict her and sentence her to death. And that's what the prosecution chose to try and prove. If they had tried to prove manslaughter, they probably would have been successful with the evidence they had. But instead, they went what I call big game hunting, went up here when the evidence they had was really for a much lesser crime.
What about some other high-profile cases we've seen? O.J. Simpson, Blagojevich. What are your thoughts on them?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, one of the common things that seems to be running through cases where people either are seen to be not found not guilty, but actually people think that they're guilty, or the opposite,
Right.
is whether or not the defendant testifies. And as you saw in O.J. Simpson, you saw in Casey Anthony, some other high-profile cases, the defendant did not testify. They instead focused their case on the ambiguity of what the prosecution had to prove.
Wow.
And they were able to show that they did not meet their burden of proof, and the jurors had enough doubt to find them not guilty. In the Blagojevich case, however, the exact opposite happened. He testified and removed all ambiguity and all doubt. And the jurors were left with no decision other than, okay, he did what he's been charged with.
Okay, well, thank you so much for breaking down this case and some other cases for us. Guys, coming up next, we are going to talk to the Exoneration Project that helped free Eric.